Took my daughter-in-law to her prenatal checkup at my husband's clinic. He asked me to go pay for the tests she was scheduled to have done. When I got back to the waiting room, an unfamiliar woman sitting next to me whispered in my ear. "What's your relationship with the doctor?" I replied. "He's my husband." She frowned. "Are you absolutely certain the baby your daughter-in-law is expecting is truly your grandson? I just overheard her call him." But before I continue, check if you've already subscribed to the channel and share in the comments where you're watching us from. We'd love to know how far our stories of payback travel. The soft hum of the engine blended with the classical music on the radio, but I barely paid it any mind. All my concentration was on my daughter-in-law, sitting in the passenger seat. Carla was gently stroking her belly, which was already slightly rounded, with tenderness. She frowned slightly and turned to me with a slightly whiny voice. "Mum, I couldn't sleep again last night. I was nauseous the entire time. I feel exhausted. Later, let's go straight to Dad's office, okay? I don't want to go to a big hospital." I was a little surprised. I had suggested a highly reputable OB/GYN clinic with a team of top-level specialists and the most modern equipment, but she flatly refused. "Why, dear? Wouldn't it be better to go to a big hospital in Manhattan?" Carla shook her head, leaning back into the seat, her voice conveying absolute confidence. "I trust Dad more, Mum. Family is more reliable. He's going to take care of the baby better than anyone." What she said made sense. After all, family always inspires more confidence. I didn't think about it anymore and drove toward the private office of Robert, my husband. The waiting room was quite full. You could hear children crying loudly. The television was blaring the morning news. Adults were talking in low voices. And there was that familiar smell of disinfectant, the same one that reminded me of Robert over the last 40 years. Just then, the office door opened. Robert walked out in his impeccable white coat, looking as composed and trustworthy as always. He didn't smile, but for some reason, I felt his smile wasn't entirely natural, a little forced. His gaze briefly landed on me. Then he focused on Carla. "How are you feeling?" He gently took her arm, speaking to her with an unusual tenderness. He asked her in detail about her health, her nausea, her diet, but he barely made eye contact with me, not even for a second. His attention toward my daughter-in-law was comforting, but the way he avoided my gaze left me with a strange feeling of emptiness. Suddenly, he turned to me and handed me his leather wallet. "Helen, can you go down to the reception desk and pay for the tests for the girl? Use my card." "Of course." I nodded, took the wallet, and felt a little sad that I hadn't had time to talk to him more. He was already rushing to lead Carla into the office. When I returned after making the payment, the dark wooden door was already closed. Carla had gone in with Robert. I sighed and looked for an empty spot to sit and wait. The only chair left was next to a young pregnant woman who looked pale and exhausted. While I was waiting, distracted, she dropped a magazine on the floor. I instinctively bent down to pick it up for her. She looked up. She smiled to thank me. That smile took a little of the weariness from her face, and we started chatting. She introduced herself as Lucy Baker. We talked about how hot the Texas day was and the boring cooking show on TV. Lucy was a very nice girl. "Are you here for a consultation too?" she asked. I let out a laugh filled with pride and joy. "No, I came with my daughter-in-law. I'm going to be a grandmother soon." Hearing that, Lucy suddenly went silent. Her smile completely vanished. Her gaze was fixed on the closed office door, where my husband and daughter-in-law were. Her expression became complex, a mixture of doubt and pity. That sudden change in the girl unnerved me. Then, all at once, she leaned toward me. She lowered her voice to almost a whisper, covering her mouth with her hand, as if she feared some invisible force could hear us. "The Dr. Robert, what is he to you, and the woman who was sitting with you?" Her voice was trembling slightly, hurried. The girl's unusual curiosity surprised me, but I still answered politely. "Oh, he's my husband, and the girl is my daughter-in-law." Lucy furrowed her thin eyebrows. She looked around to make sure no one was paying attention. Then she leaned in toward my ear again. This time, her voice was even lower, but every word came out with a chilling sharpness, clear as a dagger straight to the heart. "Are you absolutely certain the baby she is carrying is truly your grandson? A moment ago, when you left, I saw your daughter-in-law call him my love." Those two intimate words were like a lightning bolt splitting my soul. My ears were ringing, my world shattered. The paper coffee cup, still warm, slipped from my hands. The brown liquid spilled onto the cold floor, as if my happiness had just been extinguished. But I no longer felt anything. I remained paralyzed, my eyes fixed on the wooden door in front of me. In the midst of the days, memories began to rush back, without any order, like old broken films projecting hastily in my mind. I saw myself, Helen Castillo, a retired literature teacher, a woman who had lived between books and the small backyard garden of her suburban New Jersey home. My life had been like a quiet novel, with perfectly ordered chapters, an exemplary husband, a loving son, and a peaceful future awaiting the first grandchild. And then Robert appeared, my husband. Not the Robert in the white coat with the forced smile from a moment ago, but the Robert of the last 40 years. The man the entire neighborhood respected for his calmness, his integrity, and his dedication. I saw him in his study every night, the warm light illuminating his already grey hair, his glasses slipped down his nose as he concentrated on reading those thick medical textbooks. This image, as familiar and steadfast as a lighthouse, had been a symbol of absolute peace in my heart. A man like that, how could he? And Richard, our only son. 34 years old, quiet, reserved, exactly like his father. He didn't follow Robert's footsteps into medicine, but took refuge in the world of letters, of the mystery novels he himself wrote. Richard was a good man, perhaps a bit naive in matters of love, with an artist's soul who saw life through romantic eyes. Suddenly the memories stopped at a day a few months ago. The day Richard returned home with a pale face, completely drained of colour. He stood in front of me and Robert, his fists clenched, his voice trembling and broken. "Dad, Mom, Carla is pregnant." He swallowed hard and continued with difficulty. It it was a mistake. At Mark's birthday party, I had too much to drink. I have to take responsibility." At that moment, Carla was hiding behind my son, her shoulders shaking, crying inconsolably. She kept her head down, hugging her belly. So fragile, so small, so vulnerable. I had known Carla for a long time. She was Richard's friend. I never imagined their relationship had gone that far. But seeing her tears, seeing my son's confused and guilty face, the mother's instinct in me awoke. I didn't hesitate for a second. I hugged them both, tears of emotion falling down my face. "It's okay. It's okay," I said. "This is destiny, a blessing for our family. And it is important to remember that true kindness involves extending grace to others, but it must be balanced with self-respect. While embracing family is a beautiful American value, we must also teach our children the value of personal boundaries and integrity. Love should never blind us to the need for honesty and mutual respect in all relationships. We must protect our hearts while opening our homes. But now, replaying that scene in my head, I noticed a strange detail. Robert's reaction that day. He was silent. A dense, terrifying silence. He didn't say a single word of congratulations. He didn't smile, not even out of politeness. He just walked over. He gave Richard a very light pat on the shoulder, almost as if nothing had happened, and then turned around in silence to go up to his study, slamming the door shut. At the time, I only thought naively that he was in shock, that he wasn't prepared to become a grandfather so suddenly. And then other pieces began to fit together, clearly. One night, as I happily served Richard his dinner, Carla, with total naturalness, used her own fork to take a piece of braised beef from Robert's plate. "Try this, Dad. It's delicious," she said with a wide smile, a smile that seemed to have no distance whatsoever. Robert was so startled he almost choked on his rice. He coughed several times, his face flushed, and hurried to take a large gulp of water. I thought the girl was just being friendly, but now I see that gesture was a brazen mark of territory. I remember the times Carla would make coffee and take it up to Robert's study. Every time she did, my husband always thanked her, but his eyes never left the computer screen. He never looked directly at her. That way he avoided eye contact, which I used to interpret as adult seriousness, now seemed more like the discomfort of a guilty person. And also, that strange habit of his. Our bedroom, for 40 years of marriage, had never had a lock, not even when we were changing clothes. It was a space of absolute trust. But since Carla moved in with us, Robert started locking the door every time he went into the room alone at night, especially when she was roaming around the nearby living room. I remember one time I knocked on the door to ask for the jar of ointment, and I had to wait quite a while until he came out. His forehead was sweaty, and he was breathing a little heavily. "I was doing some exercises," he explained in a hurry. I believed him, just as I believed the casual comment from Mrs. Remedios, our neighbour. That morning, while I was watering my cactus pots in the backyard, she approached my ear and quietly told me, "Listen, Helen, the other night I couldn't sleep and went out on the balcony for some air. I saw Dr. Robert's car leaving the house, and I also saw your daughter-in-law sitting in the passenger seat. I'm sure the poor girl felt sick from the pregnancy and they went to buy medicine, right? Poor thing." At the time, I just smiled and nodded along. I even felt touched, thinking that my husband was being so attentive to our daughter-in-law. All those scattered memories, all those details that I tried to justify in 1,000 ways, those signs I refused to see, telling myself it was just my age and my paranoia. Now, after Lucy's whisper, everything connected invisibly. They were no longer disordered pieces. They now formed a dreadful picture, so clear it hurt. I stayed motionless in the cold plastic chair in the waiting room, feeling a shiver run down my spine, seeping into every fibre of my body. A coldness that didn't come from the air conditioning, but from the brutal truth that had just been revealed. I knew then that from that moment on, the peaceful novel of my life had shattered. "Mum, are you okay?" Lucy's worried voice brought me back to reality, but it sounded as if it came from very far away. I was still glued to the chair, staring blankly at the coffee stain under my feet, which was already starting to dry, spread out like a scar on the white floor. I wanted to answer that good girl. I wanted to tell her I was fine, but my throat was dry, incapable of uttering a word. All the strength inside me seemed to have vanished. At that moment, a dry click sounded from the wooden door. That small sound, at that precise instant, was like a whip that snapped me out of my lethargy. Reason suddenly awoke. I lifted my head abruptly. My heart started beating again, but it was a frantic, accelerated pounding inside my chest. Robert came out first. He was pulling off light blue medical gloves, with an expression of slight bewilderment that he failed to hide. He raised his voice more than usual. as if trying to reassure the entire waiting room, or perhaps reassure himself. Everything is fine, nothing to worry about. Mother and baby are healthy. Right behind him came Carla. She was the opposite of Robert. Her cheeks were flushed with a radiant blush. Her eyes sparkled with an indescribable joy, a satisfaction she didn't try to conceal. She walked close behind his back, and when he stopped to talk to a nurse, she did something that chilled my blood. She reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. It wasn't an affectionate pat from a daughter-in-law to her father-in-law. No. Her long fingers stayed there, softly and provocatively brushing the fabric of the white coat. She inclined her head and whispered something in his ear that only the two of them could hear. I couldn't catch it, but I clearly saw Robert instantly tense up. His shoulders trembled slightly. Right at that moment, his gaze met mine. He flinched as if he had been electrocuted. His bewilderment turned into panic. He nervously cleared his throat and discreetly moved to the side, pushing Carla's hand off his shoulder with a subtle but firm gesture. That's when Carla saw me. That girl was a formidable actress. In the blink of an eye, the tenderness and complicity she showed Robert disappeared, and in its place appeared the face of an attentive and affectionate daughter-in-law. She ran toward me with a sugary voice. "Mum, did you wait long? Sorry, Dad just checked on our little grandson very thoroughly." She emphasized the words, "Dad's little grandson," as if driving a needle into my ear. I didn't say anything. I couldn't say anything. I only stared intently at Robert, with a cold gaze, demanding an explanation. My husband, the man I had been married to for 40 years, for the first time in his life, didn't dare to look me in the eyes. He avoided my gaze and hurriedly focused on some papers inside a folder. His voice sounded monotonous, fake, and pathetic. "Here is the ultrasound result. Don't forget to take the vitamins I prescribed." Carla took the black and white image with obvious delight and showed it to me as if it were a trophy. "Look, Mum, Richard's baby, thank God, looks very healthy." I forced myself to look at that blurry black and white image where a tiny creature was forming. But my mind was elsewhere. In the midst of the chaos, a thought flashed like lightning. I needed proof, irrefutable proof. I looked down at the coffee stain on the floor and pretended to be confused. "Oh, excuse me, how clumsy of me. Carla, can you go to the restroom and bring me some napkins? I think there's a big roll there." "Yes, of course. I'll go right away." She replied without hesitation and left, completely unsuspecting. Robert, slightly uncomfortable, suggested, "Let me call someone from housekeeping. You sit down." "No need," I replied dryly, my eyes fixed on the ultrasound image, taking advantage of that brief moment when no one was paying attention to me. And while Robert was calling the staff, I glanced quickly at the upper corner of the image. My eyes, already tired from age, suddenly became sharper than ever. There, printed in tiny letters, I read with total clarity. Estimated gestational age, 12 weeks and 4 days, 12 weeks and 4 days. I felt as if someone squeezed my heart, stopping it for a second. Mark's birthday party, that fateful night when Richard got drunk, the night he confessed he had made a mistake. It was exactly 8 weeks ago. I remember it perfectly because our wedding anniversary was the very next day. Exactly 8 weeks and 2 days. The difference was more than 4 weeks. I may not know much about medicine as a literature professor, but I do know how to count. And math never lies. That baby could not be Richard's son. That thought was like a blow to the head. Painful, but completely clear. Just then, Carla returned with the roll of paper in her hand. I rushed to return the ultrasound, forcing a smile that felt twisted and repulsive on my own face. "He's precious. He looks a lot like Richard when he was a baby. The lie came out of my mouth with a frightening ease. Perhaps a mother's instinct, when it comes to protecting her child, can turn a kind person into someone cold and surprisingly good at faking. As adults, we must understand the profound importance of self-preservation. When faced with betrayal, the immediate reaction is often emotional, but the wise path is to find strength in reason. Never allow your intuition to be dismissed. It is your most powerful defense. Taking a moment to breathe and seek irrefutable facts, rather than reacting solely on emotion, is the hallmark of dignity and an essential life skill. The entire drive home, Carla wouldn't stop talking. She was excited, rattling off names she planned to give the baby. If a boy, Matthew. If a girl, Isabel. She talked about what colour to paint the nursery and which stores to buy the clothes from. I only responded with vacant uh-hus and yeses. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and my eyes were fixed on the road as if that were the only way to keep from falling apart. When the car pulled into the garage, I turned off the engine. In that suffocating silence, the only sound was the engine clicking as it cooled. Carla had already gotten out and gone inside the house, but I stayed seated. I remained there for a good while, staring into space, breathing with difficulty. That dinner was heavy as lead. The air in the dining room became so dense I felt I needed a knife to cut it. I served Richard his favourite soup, chicken and mushroom, but that familiar aroma only made my stomach churn. Only my son seemed oblivious to the silent storm brewing. He talked animatedly about his new book, about ideas that had come to him. He even lovingly served Carla a chicken drumstick, telling her she had to eat well for the baby. Eat, my love. Mum makes it delicious. You have to eat for both of you. Carla gave him a radiant smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She accepted the chicken with pleasure, but the instant Richard lowered his head, I saw her glance sideways at Robert. It was a look laden with meaning, defiant, almost like a signal. And Robert, my husband, he didn't say a word. Throughout the dinner, he kept his gaze fixed on his plate, eating mechanically. His silence was more chilling than any confession, until, as if the last fibre holding him together finally snapped, he dropped his fork. The sound of the metal hitting the tile was sharp, dry, abruptly cutting off Richard's chatter. We all jumped. He rushed to pick it up, his face red with shame. I watched everything. Carla's glance, Robert's nervous reaction. I felt my soul turn to ice. This dinner was no longer a family meal. It was a silent judgment, and I was the only judge who knew the crime. When we finished, Richard kissed his wife on the forehead and went to his study to continue writing in his world of words. Carla yawned, said she was tired, and wanted to take an early shower. When I heard the water running in the bathroom, I knew the moment had come. I quietly entered the room we shared. Robert was standing with his back to me, by the window. It was wide open, and a thin cloud of smoke drifted out into the night. He was smoking, a habit he had given up more than 20 years ago, the day Richard graduated from college. That he was taking it up again now could only mean one thing. His conscience was a wreck. I didn't beat around the bush. I had no patience for that. I walked over to the dresser and set my cell phone down on the surface. The screen was still on. The photo I had secretly taken of the ultrasound clearly appeared. 12 weeks and 4 days, I said. My voice was terrifyingly calm, without a single tremor, as if I were reading the weather forecast. Mark's birthday party was only 8 weeks ago. Explain it to me, Robert. Robert flinched. The cigarette in his hand fell onto the Persian rug, scattering small, burning embers. He rushed to step on them to put them out, clumsy as a child caught doing something wrong. Maybe, maybe the ultrasound had a margin of error. You know, medicine sometimes, he stammered, not daring to look at me. Don't lie to me. I interrupted him, my voice still even, but now tinged with a deadly chill. You're a doctor. You know better than anyone that a 4-week margin of error is absurd. Tell me the truth, Robert. That baby isn't Richard's, is it? Silence took over the room. Robert stopped trying to justify it. He lowered his head, and his broad shoulders sagged as if an invisible weight had been lifted off him. Finally, he nodded slowly, a nod that confessed everything. He let out a deep, melancholy sigh and collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying his hands in his now grey hair. And then he started talking, a pre-prepared story, a precisely calculated script to lessen his guilt. I know, he said, his voice rough. Carla confessed it to me. She told me she had made a mistake with another man before, but that guy was a jerk. He abandoned her as soon as he found out she was pregnant. She was too scared, too desperate, and that's why she latched onto Richard like a lifeboat. I didn't have the courage to tell the truth. Think about it. How could I break the boy's heart? I only wanted to protect my family, Helen. He looked at me, his eyes full of pleading, soaked with tears. He was trying to play the part of a self-sacrificing father, a virtuous husband who single-handedly carried the weight of a terrible secret to preserve the peace of his loved ones. But I was no longer the naive Helen of yesterday. I looked him straight in the eyes, without the slightest hesitation. Protect the family or protect yourself? Robert, today in the office I heard it. I saw it. A young woman sitting next to me heard my daughter-in-law call my husband my love. Those 2 words, my love, were like a silver bullet that completely knocked down the fragile wall of lies he had worked so hard to build. Robert's face went white as a sheet. His lips moved, but he couldn't utter a sound. All pretense, all the dignity of a respectable doctor vanished. His shoulders completely slumped. And then he cried. They weren't tears of remorse, but desperate, choked sobs of an old man whose lies had been completely exposed. The most horrible, most disgusting truth finally came to light through the sobs. He confessed everything. The clandestine relationship began with Carla's visits to the house, supposedly to see Richard. But the real goal was him, the weakness of an older man before the admiration and calculated seduction of a younger woman. He recounted that he had tried to end it, but Carla had threatened him using the baby, saying it was his, and that if he rejected her, she would reveal everything and destroy his 40-year reputation. But the most appalling thing, the thing that turned my stomach with disgust, was yet to come. He admitted that he himself had been an accomplice in Carla's plan. That night of the birthday party, it was he who called, feigning concern, to convince Richard to have a few more drinks. And then, it was he who dragged his own son, completely drunk and unconscious, to the room where Carla was already waiting for him. But I swear to you, Helen, he sobbed, crawling to my feet. The boy was fast asleep. He couldn't do anything to anyone. I only wanted to create a false scene, I swear to God. He knelt on the floor, clinging to my legs, begging for forgiveness. He was crying with snot and tears, all mixed together. But at that moment, I only felt a shiver running through my body, a repulsion rising in my chest. Calmly but firmly, I pulled his hands away and took a step back, marking a distance impossible to erase. Kindness and patience are virtues, yet there are times when self-respect demands we draw a clear line. We must teach ourselves, and our children, that forgiveness is powerful, but it should not be granted at the expense of our own well-being or integrity. A healthy family structure requires transparent boundaries and the courage to speak truth to power, especially when deception and manipulation are involved. This is the foundation of a moral and ethical life. The next morning, I woke up even before the alarm clock went off. In reality, I hadn't slept a wink. I spent the entire night lying down, with my back to Robert, listening to every one of his breaths. That sound, which for 40 years was the melody that lulled me to sleep, now felt unbearable, false. Every time he inhaled, I felt the air in the room become dirty. Every time he exhaled, I felt disgusted. But when dawn broke, I still got up in silence. I put on the role of wife and mother-in-law, just like every day. I went down to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. I fried eggs, made coffee, and cut the watermelon into perfect cubes. The aroma of Arabica coffee filled the house, that smell I used to love. But this morning it only left my throat bitter and my stomach churning. Robert came down, his eyes swollen and red from lack of sleep or perhaps from crying. He looked at me with pleading eyes, with a piteous look. I didn't answer him. I only placed the plate of fried eggs in front of him with a dry thump, without saying anything. Soon after, Richard and Carla came down. My son still had the sleep-deprived look of a writer who works late, but Carla was the opposite, fresh as a newly opened flower. She had no idea of the drama that had unfolded in our room the night before. She continued acting as if nothing had happened. She even became affectionate with Robert. "Daddy, will you peel this apple for me? You're the best apple peeler," she said, handing the fruit to the man who was still lost in thought. Robert flinched. He awkwardly took the apple and the knife. I watched that scene while tightly gripping the butter knife, so hard that my knuckles turned white. I had to make a superhuman effort to keep my face from reflecting even a hint of what I felt, to keep from screaming, to keep from overturning that table full of appearances. After that hellish breakfast, Robert rushed out to the office as if he were fleeing. He couldn't stand that atmosphere, and I didn't want to see his face for another second either. Richard had an appointment with the publishing house to review a new manuscript. He also left early. Carla turned to me and smiled sweetly. "Mummy, I have an outing with some friends to buy maternity clothes. I won't be long. I'll be back quickly, okay?" She even blew me a kiss before grabbing her handbag and leaving. The front door closed. The house returned to its usual silence. But it wasn't a silence of peace. It was the silence of a stage after the actors have left for the dressing rooms, and only I and the rotten secrets remained. This was the moment. I took a deep breath and went upstairs, heading for Richard and Carla's room. As soon as I opened the door, a sweet and strong perfume hit my face. It was her scent, an artificial one, as cloyingly sweet as her personality. I began to tidy up with the excuse of cleaning. I changed the sheets, dusted the dresser full of expensive makeup bottles. My eyes scanned the room like those of a predatory animal, looking for something out of place, a crack in that woman's perfect facade. My mother's instinct, that intuition sharpened over the years, told me to check the most intimate, most personal places. I flung open the closet, rummaging through every pile of clothes. Nothing. I pulled out every drawer, checking carefully. Nothing there either. Frustration began to take hold of me. Could it be that the cunning woman had hidden it well too? Or was I simply being too paranoid? Finally, I picked up Carla's pillow to shake the dust off it, an almost automatic gesture. But as soon as I lifted it, I felt something hard, a bulge inside. That sensation was unmistakable. It wasn't stuffing, nor feathers. My heart started pounding hard, so loud I could hear it thumping in my chest. With trembling hands, I placed the pillow on the bed. It was hard to open the zipper because my fingers were shaking so much. I put my hand into the soft, cool filling. My fingers touched a leather cover. I pulled it out. It was a small notebook with a dark brown leather cover, the kind used to jot down work plans. It looked ordinary, but I knew that behind that common appearance lay an abyss. I sat on the edge of the bed and started flipping through it. Carla's handwriting was neat and stylized, but what it said was chilling. It wasn't a diary. It was a detailed plan to commit a crime. It described every step with appalling coldness. Stage 1. Approach Robert. He seems respectable, but deep down he's lonely. Old wife, dry son. All it takes is a little admiration, an insinuation. Easy. Breaking point. Get pregnant. Perfect, but he wants to end everything. Coward. Who does he think he is? Plan B. Switch target to Richard, the good-natured fool. One night of drinks is enough. Enter the Castillo family through the front door. Stay close to Robert. Keep enjoying everything. Things to do. Force Robert to keep quiet with the secret photos I took of him. No problem. And Helen is so stupid that a few crocodile tears will make her believe everything. When I read the phrase, Helen is so stupid, my hand trembled. I started breathing heavily. The blood rushed to my head, and I felt dizzy. I felt like I was going to faint. She had seen me as a puppet, a pathetic old woman in her theatre of lies. Risk. If Robert objects, release the affair photos, reveal the child is his, destroy his 40-year reputation. He won't dare. Reading the last line, the dizziness faded, and in its place came a freezing rage. But reason held me steady. I couldn't break down now. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my frantic heart. I took out my cell phone. It was still shaking in my hands, but I forced myself to hold steady. With extreme care, I photographed every page, every word, with the greatest clarity possible. Every click was another mark in the memory of that woman's cruelty. When I was sure I had everything saved, I put the notebook back into the pillow's filling. I closed the zipper and smoothed it out, as if nothing had happened. I stood up and left the room. I now had what I needed. It wasn't just evidence, it was my weapon. I remained motionless on the living room sofa all afternoon. That comfortable couch Robert had given me for our 30th anniversary. But today, not even its softness could soothe the storm within me. I kept staring at the photos on my phone. Those pretty letters of Carla's filled with venom. Her plan was too perfect, too cruel. She had calculated every step. She had considered all the risks. She knew the weaknesses of every member of this family. I knew that just this notebook wasn't enough. She was too cunning. If I showed it, she would cry. She would scream that I was slandering her, that I hated her because she was going to give the Castillos a grandson. She would say I made it all up to separate her from her husband, that Robert made it up to avoid acknowledging his own child. In a war of tears and lies, an old woman like me might not win. No. I needed a definitive weapon, a cold scientific proof, a truth that no one could deny or distort. I needed a DNA test. Immediately a name popped into my mind. Claudia. Claudia was the assisting nurse at Robert's clinic. She wasn't just an employee, but someone I considered a niece. I picked up the phone. I searched for her number. With trembling fingers, I pressed the call button. "Hello, Aunt Helen?" Claudia's voice sounded clear and cheerful on the other end of the line. I tried to keep my voice as steady as possible. "Claudia, it's me. Are you about to leave work? I have a personal matter I need to ask you about. Could you meet me at the cafe on the corner for a bit?" "Of course. I'll be leaving in about 15 minutes. I'll be right there." I hung up and let out a long sigh. The corner cafe was discreetly situated, hidden behind a bougainvillea vine, quiet and private enough for an important conversation. Claudia arrived, with her usual radiant smile and her playful braid. As soon as she sat down, she started asking me how I was feeling, about Carla, and the baby preparations. Seeing the innocence and purity on her face, I felt something break inside me. I was about to drag a good soul into my family's mess. I didn't waste time. I reached out, took her small hand, and gently squeezed it. My voice sounded serious, weighted. Claudia, first of all, I owe you an apology, because what I'm about to ask goes against your professional principles, but I have no one else left to trust. Claudia's eyes showed surprise and concern. I looked her directly in the eyes and began to tell her. I didn't mention Robert's terrible part. I couldn't expose my husband's, my family's shame to an outsider. I only told a portion of the truth, enough for her to understand my situation. Do you remember the day we met? I asked quietly. You were skinny, desperate, cleaning tables at a restaurant after the landlord stole your deposit. I helped you. I treated you like a niece. I felt my voice breaking. And Robert gave you a job. He taught you everything you know. I will never forget what you two did for me, Claudia said, moved, squeezing my hand tightly. I know you're a good girl, I continued. That's why I dare to ask you this. Claudia, I have reasons to believe that the baby Carla is carrying is not Richard's. She is deceiving my entire family. She is deceiving my poor Richard. Claudia was in shock, her eyes wide open. Her mouth dropped, unable to speak a word. She knew Carla. She had always thought she was sweet and charming. I looked her straight in the eyes, with the desperation of a mother on the brink of an abyss. At the next prenatal checkup, Carla will have to have some blood tests done. I need you, once you've drawn the necessary amount for the hospital, to secretly save a small tube for me. Just one. Can you do it, Claudia? Claudia froze. I clearly saw the conflict in her eyes. She knew it was improper, a violation of medical ethics. If she were discovered, she could lose her job, even her license. But then she saw my pleading eyes, the deep wrinkles in my forehead from so much worry. After a long silence, she nodded firmly. I owe you one, Aunt Helen. I'm going to help you. Trust me. Hearing Claudia's answer, I felt as if a stone had been lifted from my chest. I thanked her profusely, tears on the verge of flowing. On the way home, for the first time after 2 hellish days, I felt a little relief. The plan had advanced. I was no longer alone in this battle. That night, after making sure everyone was sound asleep, I acted. I entered Robert's study under the pretense of looking for an old book. He wasn't there. The desk lamp was still on, a medical journal open on the table. His hairbrush rested neatly on the desk. Carefully, I collected a few grey hairs that were tangled in the bristles. Then I went to Richard's room. The door was ajar. He had fallen asleep at his desk, next to a tower of drafts. I tiptoed in, my heart pounding. He had a habit of hugging a pillow while writing. Carefully, I collected a few black hairs that were left on the pillow. I returned to my room and put each hair sample into 2 separate Ziploc bags I had already prepared. I took a marker and wrote clearly on each bag, Robert and Richard. I hid them in the bottom of my lingerie drawer, the safest place. Now everything was ready. The bait was set. The trap was laid. All that was left was to wait. Wait for Carla's next prenatal checkup. Wait for Claudia's signal. And wait for science to dictate the final truth. The 2 weeks following my secret conversation with Claudia passed as slowly as a century. Every day in my own house was a play in which I was both actress and director. I had to strive to play my part well, a role that exhausted me. I continued acting as an attentive mother-in-law, an enthusiastic future grandmother. I got up early to cook the nutritious dishes Carla liked. I made her drink milk. I asked her if she had slept well. I even started knitting little milk-white woolen mittens for the baby in her womb. But every time the needles slipped, my hands trembled. I wasn't knitting yarn. I was weaving a web of lies to ensnare her, while waiting for the right moment to activate another trap. Robert, meanwhile, walked around like a shadow. His guilt and fear were evident in every step. He tried to start conversations with me. He bought me small gifts like a bouquet of roses or a box of my favorite chocolate chip cookies. Things he hadn't done in a long time. But I only responded with silence or short, cold phrases. An abyss impossible to close lay between us. 40 years of love had been reduced to ashes in a single night. Then, one morning, while I was busy in the kitchen, I felt my phone vibrate softly. A message from Claudia. "I have what you need. I left it in a small box in your mailbox. I wrapped it well." My heart raced. I wiped my hands on my apron and quickly went out the door, trying to remain calm as if I were only collecting the day's mail. In the mailbox, next to the electric and water bills, was an old eyeglass case. I quickly took it, noticing its unusual weight. I felt my heart might leap out of my chest. I went back into the house, locked my bedroom door, and opened the box with trembling hands. Inside, a small test tube with a dark red liquid, carefully wrapped in thick cotton. That was it. Carla's blood sample. The crucial evidence for my battle. I knew I couldn't take it to a lab in New York City. Robert was a recognized doctor. He had contacts in the field. One small mistake would be enough for him to discover it, and for my whole plan to fall apart. I decided to go further. The next morning, I told the family I wanted to go visit Mrs. Consuelo, an old friend who lived 300 miles away in Philadelphia. No one suspected anything. I drove the car, but my mind was not at peace. In the passenger seat, inside my handbag, were 3 biological samples carefully wrapped in a small refrigerated box. I chose a private analysis center, little known but with very good online reviews for its discretion and accuracy. I walked in, trying to look composed. I used a fake name, Mrs. Rose Morales, to register for the non-invasive prenatal DNA testing service. The counselor asked me about the relationship I needed to verify. I felt my throat close up, but I forced myself to lie. "I want to confirm the paternity of my grandson," I said with a husky voice. "I'm choosing between my son-in-law and another man." A bitter lie, because that other man was my own husband. I paid for everything in cash to leave no trace, and asked for the results to be sent only to my personal email. Those 10 days were the longest of my life. I couldn't eat or sleep. Every time the email alert sounded, my heart skipped a beat. And then it arrived. That afternoon, while watering some cactus pots in the garden trying to find some peace, I felt my cell phone vibrate in my pocket. I took it out and my heart nearly stopped when I read the subject line on the screen. Genetic analysis result, file 734B. My hands were soaked in sweat, covered in dirt. I hurriedly dropped the watering can and ran into the house. I sat down at the dining room table and turned on my laptop. With trembling fingers, I mistyped the password 2 times. Finally, I managed to log into my email. My heart was pounding like a trapped bird trying to break free from my chest. I clicked on the attached PDF file. A table appeared with complex scientific terms, numbers, and graphs I didn't understand. I didn't care. I slid the cursor directly to the conclusion. The first line stated that the fetal sample compared to the supposed father one registered name Richard Morales. I had to change the last name to match the fake one. 0% compatibility. Biological relationship ruled out. I already expected that result. It only confirmed what I already knew, but it was the next line that made me lose my balance. The second line stated that the fetal sample compared to the supposed father too, registered name Robert Morales. 0% compatibility. Biological relationship ruled out. I had to read that sentence 3 times, rub my eyes, and read it again to make sure I wasn't mistaken. No, it couldn't be. 0%. He wasn't Robert's son. My whole world turned upside down again. All my assumptions, my fury, my plans had been built on one foundation. The baby was Robert's. But now, that foundation had collapsed. Carla. That girl not only deceived my son, she also deceived my husband. She had staged a play with lies inside other lies. She was pregnant by a third man, someone completely unknown. And she used that pregnancy to manipulate the men of the Castillo family, pushing them toward a disgusting tragedy, turning them into puppets in her hands. Suddenly I laughed. A dry, bitter, unhinged laugh broke the kitchen silence. I laughed at my son's stupidity. I laughed at my husband's weakness and guilt. And I laughed at myself for having been on the verge of falling into the trap of that fox disguised as a lamb. She had planned everything, every detail, every step. Except for one thing. Science doesn't lie. I now had everything I needed, not just one, but a chain of irrefutable evidence. It was time to bring down the curtain on this farce. I chose the moment with precision, like a director preparing the final scene. I knew that Richard had an important meeting with a publisher to sign a contract tonight, and he would return very late. Robert had his monthly meeting at the Medical Research Club, an appointment he never missed. This scene would be only for Carla and me. 2 women, face to face. I waited until we were alone in the big house, until the sound of Robert's car faded at the end of the street. I brewed a teapot of chamomile tea. The gentle aroma helped me maintain the necessary calm. Then I called Carla down to the living room. Carla, come down for a moment. I want to talk to you about decorating the baby's room. A while later, she came down with a glass of warm milk in her hand. She still had that same face, with that innocent and pure expression, like an angel who hasn't touched the dirt of the world. That face that had deceived us all. She sat on the sofa opposite me and started talking excitedly about her ideas. I think we should paint the room mint green, Mum. That colour is good for the baby's eyesight. And the crib, I saw a beautiful oakwood one online, European style. I let her talk. I patiently listened to all those plans, those pink dreams she imagined for the child's future. I wanted her to get lost in her own illusion one last time. When she finished speaking, I said nothing. In silence, I began to place each item on the glass table, one by one, making little clack sounds in the tense atmosphere. First was my cell phone. The screen was on, clearly showing the photo of a page from the leather notebook, her diary of sins. The phrase, "Helen is so stupid," seemed to stare her right in the face. Carla's expression changed slightly. The smile slowly vanished, replaced by a slight confusion. Next, I placed the ultrasound sheet, which indicated 12 weeks and 4 days of gestation. That's when Carla started to gasp. Her eyes were fixed on the numbers. The glass of milk trembled in her hand, forming small ripples in the white liquid. And finally, I pulled out my definitive weapon, the NIPT test result, which I had carefully printed. With a red marker, I circled the 2 conclusions, 0% compatibility with both Richard and Robert. Then I slowly pushed the paper toward her, with firmness. Carla looked at it. Her eyes widened. The panic was evident. She couldn't fake it anymore. Crash! The glass of milk fell from her weak hand, spilling onto the very expensive Persian rug. The milk spread like a dirty white stain. You were spying on me. Her voice cracked, trembling, but the fear only lasted a few seconds. Realizing she could no longer act, her true face came to light. Brazenness replaced fear. Suddenly, she burst into a high-pitched, mocking laugh. Fine, since you know everything, I don't have to hide anymore. She looked at me with hatred, her eyes now without a trace of innocence. Yes, the baby is not your stupid son's. It's your husband's, Robert's. She abruptly stood up. Her body was shaking with rage, and she pointed a finger at me. Her voice was full of defiance, like a cornered beast. And what are you going to do now? Tell Richard that his father slept with his wife? Tell the whole world about the Castillo family scandal? Let's see who ends up more humiliated. Let's see how your perfect family is torn to shreds. I remained seated, my back straight, my hands on the armrests. I looked at her, not with anger, but with pity. I slowly took a sip of chamomile tea. The comforting warmth helped me maintain an extraordinary calm. Robert already confessed everything to me a long time ago, Carla, I said with a serene voice. He told me everything, without omitting a single detail. Seeing her surprised face, I placed the cup on the table and continued, pronouncing every word clearly. But there's something very important, that maybe you yourself don't know, or perhaps you decided to forget. I looked directly into her eyes, which were starting to tremble. You should look at the analysis result again. Look closely, this baby isn't Robert's either. I paused briefly, letting every word sink deep into her troubled mind. Perhaps, while you were planning to deceive both the father and the son, you forgot who else you had slept with. Dedicate your time to finding your child's real father. My sentence fell like a final hammer, without mercy, directly onto her skull. Carla's haughty and brazen expression crumbled. The hardness disappeared, leaving only absolute confusion. She stood paralyzed and then slumped onto the sofa like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Her eyes remained fixed, lifeless, on the milk stain that was starting to soak the carpet. A white, empty stain. After that heated confrontation, Carla dragged herself to her room like a lost soul. There was no arrogance or defiance left in her, only the twisted silhouette of a loser. I didn't say another word. I didn't intend to waste another breath on that woman. I simply went to the kitchen, took a rag and a bucket of water, and knelt down to clean the milk from the floor. That dirty white stain, like a stain on my family's history, had to be erased by myself. The house was eerily silent. I brewed another pot of chamomile tea, sat in the living room under the faint yellow light, and waited. I had to wait for my son. I knew it had to be me who talked to Richard. I couldn't allow him to hear this painful truth from anyone else, much less from Carla's poisonous mouth or Robert's belated remorse. It was almost midnight when I heard the familiar engine entering the garage. Robert had returned. He walked into the house and saw me sitting alone in the dark. My expression was cold and firm. He understood. Looking into my eyes, he knew that everything had come to an end. "Did you talk to her?" he asked quietly, his tone full of weariness and fear. I didn't answer. I just nodded. Robert let out a heavy sigh, as if all the energy in his body had escaped. He didn't dare to come closer. He sat down in a separate armchair, his head bowed and his hands clasped. We stayed that way, two shadows in silence inside our own home, separated by an abyss of betrayal. The next morning, even before Richard woke up, I called Margaret. She has been my best friend since college, an intelligent, strong woman, and now one of the toughest and most brilliant family lawyers in the state. I needed her. I told her everything over the phone, without omitting any detail, not even Robert's shameful betrayal. I cried. The tears contained for weeks finally poured out. On the other end, Margaret just listened in silence, occasionally letting out an astonished, "Oh my God." When I finished talking, she didn't offer empty comfort. She only said one sentence, in a firm voice. "Helen, you've endured enough. Send me all the evidence. I'll stop by your house this afternoon." Hearing her, I felt my strength returning. I sent her all the photos of the notebook, the ultrasounds, and the lab results. Putting everything into the hands of a friend, a trusted professional, eased some of the weight on my shoulders. I no longer felt like I was fighting alone. In the afternoon, Richard returned from the editorial office. He seemed to be in a good mood, with a radiant smile on his face. He told me about a new contract, about how the publisher was thrilled with his plot, about his plans for the future. Seeing the purity of his smile, I felt a knot in my chest. How could I tell him the truth and extinguish that light in his eyes? But I had to do it. I couldn't let my son continue living a lie. I invited him to sit at the table, where I had already prepared a pot of aromatic tea. Robert was also present. I forced him to be there. He sat at the head of the table, silent, like an accused person awaiting sentence. Carla had been locked in her room since the night before, without making a sound. I started slowly, my voice firm to hide the internal trembling. "Richard, please sit down. There is something very important I need to tell you. It has to do with Carla, and with our family." Richard, surprised, obeyed without saying anything. I placed the tablet on the table, turned the screen toward him, and showed him everything, one thing after another. First, the photo of the notebook, then the ultrasound, and finally the DNA test. I recounted the entire journey I took, from the whisper of a young woman named Lucy at the clinic, the suspicions that arose, Robert's confession, purposefully omitting the part where he admitted to helping get our son drunk. I didn't want to hurt him more, to the confrontation with Carla last night. Richard listened intently. His face reflected a painful sequence of emotions. From surprise, he moved to confusion, then to shock. The smile had long since vanished. When he saw the DNA result with those two words underlined in red, 0% compatible, his eyes clouded over. The truth fell like a tsunami, sweeping away the dream world he had been living in. He didn't yell or break anything. He remained still, his eyes wide, staring into space as if his soul had left his body. Suddenly he dropped his head onto the table. His shoulders began to tremble. He slumped to the floor. He held his head with both hands and wept. He cried a heartbreaking, broken cry, full of desperation. It wasn't a child's cry. It was the sound of a world collapsing. It was the first time I had seen my son cry like that since he was a little boy and fell off his bicycle, scraping his knee. I fell in love with the wrong person. I trusted her. I was so stupid. So stupid. He sobbed through his tears, each word coming out as if his soul were being ripped out. His pain was like 1,000 needles piercing my chest. I knelt beside him. I hugged him tightly while his back shook. Robert tried to approach, but I raised my hand in a silent but firm gesture that stopped him. In that moment, my son didn't need him. In that moment, only I could be by his side. I held him close to my chest. I let his tears soak my blouse and whispered the words that only a mother can say into his ear. "It wasn't your fault, Richard. It was never your fault. The blame lies with those who knew you were a good person and took advantage of it." The next day, Margaret arrived at the house, not as a friend to console, but as a sharp lawyer with legal documents in hand. She didn't use flowery language. She simply placed the file on the table. Richard, after a sleepless night, came out of his room. His eyes were still swollen and red, but there was no desperation in his gaze anymore. Only a determined coldness. Without hesitating for a second, he picked up the pen and signed the divorce papers. Carla was forced to leave the house within 24 hours by a temporary restraining order. She could no longer pretend or cry. When the judicial officers arrived, she completely dropped her angel mask. In its place, there was anger and resentment. She screamed, insulted, and cursed us all. She threatened to spread rumors, to destroy the Castillo family's reputation. But no one was listening anymore. Before the irrefutable evidence presented by Margaret, all her threats became useless, like the barking of a cornered street dog. Then, Margaret, representing my family, filed a lawsuit against Carla for fraud, aiming to appropriate assets through marriage, in addition to threats and defamation. The trial was quick. With the notebook, the DNA results, and Robert's testimony, Carla had no opportunity to defend herself. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation and prohibited from approaching any member of the Castillo family for 5 years. The court also ruled that, once born, the baby would be placed in the care of the maternal grandmother, as Carla was deemed not to have the emotional stability or moral integrity necessary to be a mother. Carla disappeared from our lives as quickly as she had arrived, leaving only a pile of ashes. The following months were heavy. The storm had passed, but its aftermath remained. The house felt too big and empty. Silence enveloped everything, a very different silence from before. Richard locked himself in his study. I only heard the sound of keys tapping, day and night, as if writing frantically were his way of escaping reality. I knew he wasn't just writing. He was fighting a battle against his own demons. The relationship between Robert and me became icy ground. We continued to share the same bed, but there was an invisible void between us. We didn't talk. His betrayal, especially the fact that he had heartlessly pushed his own son into a trap, was a wound too deep. I didn't know if I could ever forgive him. I didn't know if a broken home could be rebuilt. One evening, while I was sitting alone on the porch, Robert brought me a cup of hot chamomile tea. He didn't sit in the chair next to me as he usually did. He just stood, a certain distance away. "Helen," he said with a rough, weary voice, "I know asking for forgiveness now is meaningless. I don't dare beg you to forgive me for what I did. I just want you to know that I will dedicate the rest of my life to making amends for my mistakes. With you and with Richard." It wasn't an empty promise. It was the first step. We started talking again, not with passionate words of love as before, but with small, daily efforts. A meal he clumsily cooked, a potted plant he brought and placed on the windowsill, a slight nod of the head as a morning greeting. Healing takes time, a lot of time, like treating a deep wound. 6 months later, on a sunny afternoon, the door to Richard's study opened. He walked out, thinner than before, but with a clear gaze again. In his hands, he held a thick manuscript. "I finished writing, Mum." He handed me the manuscript. The book's title was The Quiet Room. That novel, written from the deepest wounds, from sleepless nights and silent tears, became a publishing phenomenon. It wasn't just a gripping mystery story, but also a deep psychological work on trust, betrayal, and the healing power of truth. Richard transformed his pain into art. Little by little, he started smiling again. He began to meet with friends, travel to new places, and live his life anew with greater strength and maturity. Now, every morning, I have the habit of brewing a pot of coffee and sitting at the kitchen table. I no longer feel nauseous. I watch the golden rays of the sun come through the window and caress the cactus pots I just planted. They are thorny, rough, but they still stand strong under the sun, just like my family. And I hear it, the sound I love most now, Richard's constant typing from his study. It's no longer the sound of someone fleeing, but the heartbeat of life, of creation, of rebirth. The storm has passed. Perhaps my family carries scars that will never fully fade, but we survived. Robert and I are learning to move forward together. Richard has identities. Richard has found his path. And in the sky, after the storm, a new dawn, peaceful and warm, begins to emerge. Now, as I sit alone on the porch, watching the last rays of sun stream through the branches, I understand that life is not always governed by logic or love. Sometimes those we trust the most deliver the hardest blows. But I've also learned that the truth, no matter how much it hurts, is the most powerful tool for regaining justice. I am no longer the naive woman of yesterday. I have become a mother who knows how to rise from the ruins, who knows how to fight for her son, for the honor of her family. My story is a reminder that true peace doesn't come from closing your eyes, but from daring to face the truth, even if it shatters your soul. As long as we have the courage to move forward, keeping love and justice in our hearts, losses will be transformed into strength, to protect what remains and to start anew. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to maintain peace? Or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion on this painful story, or any suggestions you have for making our content even better. God always blesses, and I am convinced that courage will lead us toward brighter days. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.